listeners. This is my first attempt at reading in an ASMR fashion. I hope you enjoy. Today I will be reading a book written by Lucille. It's titled Love, Lucy. It's got a very beautiful picture of Lucy on the cover. And it was published back in 1996. Love, Lucy. Lucille Ball with Betty Hannah Hoffman. Foreword by Lucy Arnaz. Foreword. One of my mother's favorite things to do when a small group of people were involved in some ordinary conversation was to wait until one of them left the room, and as soon as she returned, blurt out convincingly, "Here she is now. Why don't you tell her to her face?" This was always followed by frozen silence, and then she'd howl with that depth of the sea laugh she had. To see the look on the poor soul's face, who for one horrible moment thought someone had been saying terrible things about her while she was gone. I'm not sure why, but I keep thinking about that now as I sit down to introduce you to this treasure. I lost my father at 5 minutes after midnight on December 2nd, 1986, and my mother at dawn on April 26, 1989. For my brother, Desi, and me, it has been a difficult and complicated mourning period. Normally, I would think when an adult child loses their first parent, there's a parent's spouse there to take over, to handle the technical decisions, to bury and bequeath. My parents were divorced in the late 50s, and both were married to others for more than 20 years. My father's wife, Edie, died of cancer the year before he did, so we were his only heirs. And after my mother's death, her husband of 27 years and our stepfather, Gary Morton, learned from her executors that he had been very lovingly and carefully provided for, but that she had placed Desi and me in charge of her estate. For any children, tending to an estate is an unwelcome and painful process, no matter when the loss comes. Being the one responsible for making all the important final decisions can be a great burden and an instant maturing process, all at the same time. The organizing alone is overwhelming, from ridiculous details like who gets the gravy boat to selling the house, to where are you going to put all the stuff you simply aren't ready to part with, to choosing what kind of service you think your parent would want without ever having talked with her about it. Well, we did it, not once, but twice within 3 years, and these were not ordinary parents. An old hat box with a rusted zipper filled with graying white gloves without fingertips, which you'd assume was toss-it material, hardly worthy of the thrift shop pile because a priceless museum piece when you realize that those gloves were worn by the professor character my mother immortalized on the I Love Lucy show. Every gown or pocketbook, every seemingly trivial possession that happened to be engraved became instant memorabilia. We had to think twice before putting it anywhere. My brother, Desi, and I debated the importance of preserving those things, and considering the frame of mind we were in at the time, the process often turned into hours of discussions about human destiny and the twisted priorities of would-be scavengers, often either reducing us both to tears of longing and numbness, or giving way to hysterical fantasies of building life-size sculptures of Vitamina Benjamin with all the leftover Hannah rinse. After watching what happened to the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis estate, I wish we had sold it by the ounce and donated the proceeds to AIDS research. Oddly, in some ways, after all these years, life goes on as if they were still here, simply off somewhere, on location perhaps, and unable to get to a phone. If you go by the daily requests for their services, they'd both be happy to know, I'm sure, that they're almost busier now than when they were alive. On any given day, we field dozens of requests for film clips, memorial awards, memorabilia for charities, documentaries, television specials, movie deals, and countless licenses to merchandise rights, which we try to guide gracefully. Unfortunately, some of it translates into bizarre situations that neither Desi or I enjoy dealing with very much. I really hate coming into my office in the morning and finding a full set of tiny bobbing head dolls on my desk that look like some Hitchcock interpretation of Lucy Ricardo with makeup by Salvador Dali. It's a lot to take in before you've had your coffee. Sometimes you want to get on with your own life and not be forced to spend such enormous amounts of time talking about your deceased parents, to be continually liable for making responsible decisions on their behalf, to have to learn how to listen and decode all of the shyster-meisters who spend endless amounts of otherwise useful energy weaving weirder and weirder ways to snag their own personal piece of the Lucy legend. And so many times you wish they were still here, even if for a few moments, just so you could turn around and ask, is this okay? Do you mind if they do this? But you quickly realize that the voices that once could both calm your fears and drive you so crazy are truly silent forever. Until one day, while trying to sort out some of the complicated legalities of running the estates, Desi and I asked our mother's former attorney, Ed Perlstein, to sift through some of his old file boxes in search of some contracts we needed, and something remarkable happened. There, in a dusty box of envelopes and tapes, he uncovered what turned out to be a never-before-published autobiographical work of our mother's. The package, postmarked 1966 from Betty Hannah Hoffman, Los Altos, California, simply said, Lucy. The manuscript was written in the first person and seemed to span Mom's entire life up to 1964. I was stunned when I read it. I cried. So many people, including myself, had tried to tell this story, but up until that moment, I never knew that my mother had written about her own life. When my brother Desi read the manuscript, he was overcome with emotions. He said, I loved it. I loved reading it. There's wonderful energy that comes through, a fire in her belly as a young kid, a sense of adventure, like I want to make some noise. Her connections from the past to present, I salute her for her ability to think in terms of what did I learn from the past. And there's some great straight from the heart advice. I love the way she wrote about her feelings for Dad. It was very powerful for me to hear about when she first met him. Some people prolong their unhappiness by dramatizing it, which, as Vernon Howard used to tell me, was like expecting applause for having a headache. Mom does not do this. Instead of over-dramatizing what happened in her life, she seems to be trying to understand what her life is all about, to learn to love in a new way. That's what I found most endearing about this autobiography. especially regarding her earlier memories and what happened during her most formative years that contributed to the kind of woman, actress, and mother she became. I only wished I had access to all of this priceless information in 1993 when I was making Lucy and Desi a home movie, as it would have saved me a lot of time and research, and would have given me a much deeper understanding of the pain she had to assimilate as a child, and the depth of her struggle to achieve the kind of success she eventually did. Now, along with a book, our father's fascinating fact-filled reminiscence of his life, written in 1976, my brother and I and our children, along with the whole Ball Arnaz clan, have one of the most remarkable, comprehensive family histories ever documented. Another wonderful discovery was that Mrs. Hoffman had taped all her interviews with Mom, so although this is an as-told-to autobiography, unlike some others I have read, I could hear my mother's voice in the phrasing. Later, when I had the chance to listen to the 20-some hours of original interviews, I realized that was because, for once in her life, my mother was quoted accurately. I, of course, was tempted every now and then, while editing, to insert the note, "See my father's book" for his version of this same story. But even then, it was comforting to remember that there are always two sides to every story, and to take everyone's account of what happened to them with a grain of salsa. So what happened way back then that put this book in that box? I called my mom's longtime secretary, Wanda Clark, to see if she had any recollection of having worked on something like this, but Wanda was as shocked as I. The manuscript must have been tucked away shortly before she came to work for Mom. I called my Aunt Cleo, who had been producing my mother's radio shows around that same time, and who at first was as puzzled as Wanda had been, but who eventually said, "You know, I do have this memory of your mother talking into a tape recorder a lot." I called my stepfather Gary, my mother's brother Fred Ball, and longtime family friends like Marcella Rapwin, but no one knew anything about it, so I sent them all copies to help judge the manuscript's legitimacy and accuracy. Even though they had known her longer than almost anyone, each in his or her own way found her autobiography fascinating, intriguing, and illuminating, and marveled at her vivid recollections and the wealth of detail. And every one of them said something like, "Boy, you can really hear her voice in it." Finally, after many weeks of sleuthing, we were able to contact Mrs. Hoffman, now in her 70s and living in Northern California, and as we tried to piece together the hows, wheres, and whens, we discovered some of the whys. Apparently, in the early 1960s, not long after my mother had married Gary Martin, her dear friend and mentor, the late Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, encouraged her to record her thoughts about her dramatic and challenging life. But knowing that she was starring in a television series, running a studio, and trying to raise two high-voltage teenagers at the same time, and would probably be unable to complete the task herself, he suggested she work with someone and do an as-told-to type of autobiography. I'm sure he must have convinced her that it would be historical and healing. Mrs. Hoffman worked with my mother for about 2 years, taping and transcribing interview sessions. In addition to these sessions, she traveled to Mom's hometown of Jamestown, New York, interviewed My stepfather Gary remembers my mother's turning to him in bed one night to say that the book she was doing was upsetting her, that she just couldn't finish it right now because it might hurt Desi. Robert Osborne of the Hollywood Reporter worked with my mother in the Desilu workshop and recently told me that he did remember when she was working on the book. He recalls she was uncomfortable with writing an autobiography so soon because it made her feel as if the rest of her life wouldn't seem as important. Whatever her reasons, all parties remember that the project was shelved with the understanding that everybody just forget about it, which is apparently what most people did. Even in early April 1989, when my husband, Lawrence Luckenbill, and I and our 3 children spent that Easter vacation with Mom and Gary in Palm Springs, she was telling us how she had finally agreed to begin work on an As Told To autobiography for Putnam with her friend and respected journalist Bob Thomas. Either she had forgotten about the 300-page head start she had lying around somewhere, or she figured it would be easier to just start from scratch with someone entirely new. We'll never know, but I do remember how much she was dreading the April 1st deadline to start working with Bob. She seemed completely overwhelmed by the task, couldn't imagine how or where to even begin. She no longer needed to fear hurting my father since he had passed away 2.5 years before, yet she feared everything else, that her memory wasn't sharp enough anymore, that nobody would want to hear any of this stuff. All the reminiscing was reminding her that a lot of the friends and loved ones upon whom she would have liked to call for help were no longer around. Unfortunately, no one else had the chance to help her remember either. She died less than 3 weeks later. I remember thinking then how sadly ironic it was that my father should have gotten the chance to tell his story during his lifetime, but that we never get to hear Mom's, to see her life as she saw it. Sad for the family, sad for the world, but since my mother and my father always insisted on a happy ending, I should have known. My brother Desi and I decided to share this with you now because we believe that's what she would have wanted, and inscribed it to all of you the way she would have signed it, simply, Love, Lucy. So,